Today in Roach Reflections I want to talk about coloured maggots. Over the years different colours have come to the fore. When I started fishing back in the late 60s I just very occasionally bought a few maggots. I can remember seeing mixed coloured maggots in about 1969 when I fished my first match. Must have bought about 10 pence worth, well 2 shillings worth it would have been back then, from a tackle shop in Oxford, the old Waltonian Tackle. And when I was at home at Wareham and I started to buy maggots quite occasionally because I didn't have much pocket money, tended to use more of things like bread paste, worms, caddis grubs. The local shop that sold maggots was Spiller's, which was actually a hardware shop that had a bit of fishing tackle and always sold bait as well. And the maggots you got there, if you could find the maggots amongst the sawdust, were all white maggots. When Guns and Sports started a couple of years later, in time they started to sell other than white maggots, started to get different colours. And those who know their Trent fishing history will know that casters took over on the Trent in the very early 60s. But sometime in the early 70s, maybe around about 73, 74, some anglers started to do very well with bronze maggots. People like Dave Thomas and then John Dean and others. Some of the other top anglers, people like Kevin Ashurst and Ivan Marks, Pete Warren, they stuck to their guns with the casters as long as they could. And there were all sorts of explanations on why didn't casters work anymore? Was it because too many bad casters had been put in and soured the water and put the fish off? But there's no doubt that the bronze maggot revolution was happening and anglers were catching lots of roach on bronze maggots. As me and my mates got older, we started to work out what coloured maggots might work best on the Dorset Froom. Once we had access to a really top class tackle shop, which was Dave Swallow's Custom Tackle in Bournemouth, we started to buy maggots of certain colours according to what we were trying to catch. And as time went on, we discovered that if you were catching small dace, and bear in mind this is in matches on the Froom, then white maggots were best. If you were catching reasonable dace, which were the bigger ones, then yellows seemed to be best. But you needed to know what you were going to be after. But when it came to the roach, which were pretty much just around the quay and above the bridge, you wanted bronze maggots. You could catch the dace on bronze maggots. If you feed anything enough bait of any colour, you're going to catch fish. But we didn't really bother with red maggots. No one was using red maggots. And then a few years later we started to fish more for bream and skimmers. We started to fish for rudd on some still waters. For the rudd, a red pinky was quite good, better than just a white pinky. They really went for the red pinky. And we found the same with the skimmers and the bream, that red maggots and red pinkies were a really useful bait. And on the Trent as well, by about 1980, when casters were not completely a thing of the past, but for the float anglers, they were mostly using bronze maggots. Some anglers started to mix a few reds in. I think they called it sort of carrots and beetroots or something like that. And they found the chub would sometimes pick out the red ones, so they'd still be feeding these maggots with a bronze maggots, but with a few red ones. And occasionally they'd try reds and get the chub amongst the roach. A similar thing happened to me around about the mid-80s. The Wareham Winter League team was coming to its sort of natural demise. We'd run out of anglers basically, and the following season we were just too many short. We had about 7 or 8 anglers and we needed at least 12. But that last season of 1985 we had 12 anglers, and we had one angler held in reserve who said that if we were absolutely struggling and had to make up the numbers, he would turn up. And he was struggling to afford the Winter League, so you needed quite a bit of bait and what with the pools and everything else. Anyway, on this final match on the Hampshire Avon, which ran from the Several fishery at Ringwood all the way up through to Downton, this angler, Paul, said that he'd be able to fill in as we were one short, but he was struggling for bait. Now, I had a load of old bait in my bait fridge from fishing on Longleat, and on there I was often using red maggots. And for the team, what I'd got for everyone was about 4 pints of bronze maggots. But this angler just had my leftovers and someone else's leftovers, and I think we sort of, because we got a generous gallons in our team bait, I was able to sort of skim off 1.5 pints of the bronze as well. So he had more of a mixture of bronze, but more reds than bronze. And at the end of the match, he'd done quite well. I think he had about 6 job for 17 pounds. It was a day of big weights, lots of fish caught. You had to attack it. That's why we had half a gallon of maggots each. And there were plenty of chub caught. I had about £10 of dace. Big weights, 30 odd pound of dace one, it was £25 a dace second, stuff like that. But he'd done well on these red maggots, and of course he was the only one in the team pretty much who had red maggots. Other anglers in our team did catch chub on bronze maggots. But what has happened in the last few years is that anglers have become obsessed with red maggots, and you'll see anglers who are just buying red maggots to fish the, for instance, my local Stour for chub. They're just using reds. And the same on the Hampshire Avon, and they're fishing for roach with red maggots. And I do wonder, it's not to say you can't catch them, whether that's the best colour. Certainly bronze was very good in the past, and of course we had the warranted scare over the Aniline Dyes. Now the Aniline Dyes are chrysidine, which is what gives you proper bronze maggots, auramine, which gives you yellow maggots, and rhodamine, which gives you red maggots. Now, to get red maggots, you feed the colour into them. They're not surface dyed, whereas the bronze, I'm not sure about the yellows, but the bronze was surface dyed. So if there was any excess dye, you end up with orange fingers, which you don't want. And for a long time, people were using stuff like, I think there was a colour called Kent Colour, feeding in a bronze, and they were a different colour bronze to the old proper bronze maggots. But I think some tackle dealers are still, and bait dealers are still using chrysidine. They deny it, but I think they are, because 1 or 2 people are getting coloured fingers from it. And I do wonder whether bronze maggots or yellow maggots would be a better bet for roach. Having said all that, yesterday I was fishing on a local still water to me, and I'd mixed a pint of mixed colours, and I did try white. There were a few yellows in there, and it was about half reds and whites generally, no bronze at all. And the only bait I could get a bite on at all was reds, and I was catching roach, including some nice roach. And double reds was better than a single red. Last year on a different pond close to me, where I fished a great deal for roach, found that white maggots were by far the best for the roach. If I put a red on, I could catch a small perch. I mean, I'm talking about fish like this, not very big. But on the white maggots, I caught, and usually again double maggots, great favourite of mine, caught roach to over £2, and a few over £1, and plenty of good quality ones. They didn't seem to want the red maggots at all. So this coloured maggot thing, there is something in it. If you blindly just buy one colour of maggots all the time, sometimes you're going to dip out. So having mixed or different colours, you can experiment. Fish aren't daft. They don't starve if they see lots of maggots coming by and they're hungry and feeding, they're not going to turn their nose up at everything and say, oh man, there's thousands of red maggots coming in, I'd rather have a white one, and I'm waiting for the one white one. They have to feed when they can. They take advantage of natural food, and they get preoccupied with a certain type of food, and they'll go for whatever that is. But there are times they can be that little bit finicky, and pick out certain colours will work better. I hope I've given you some fishing food for thought, and maybe we can figure out what's best. between us one way or the other. Until next time, that's it for now.